Welcome everybody to Blerdlines. This is your man Cam. With me, as always, is
this is Al Josh. El Jose.
As well as
the one and only Professor D.
And we are here talking about Dune 2. The press is already good, so it's getting all the 90 something Rotten Tomatoes, stuff that we don't care about things. But it's also getting a lot. The other thing, their advertising budget is fucking insane.
Oh yeah,
place I see it everywhere, especially Times Square, especially on all the ads and whatnot.
Oh, you saw that too?
Yeah, man, that shit was crazy. It looks dope too.
That's a good wraparound. Yeah, 100%.
That's probably one of the better ones I've seen. Yeah, man. So, fellas, I'll let you guys dive straight into it because I know there's a lot of feels, but there's also a lot of sand.
And we hate sand. It's everywhere.
Sand
gets in everything.
Everywhere.
It's everywhere. It gets in everything unless it has spice. If it has spice, then it's right.
Look at that. All right. Who wants to jump in first?
You could go off.
Oh, okay, I'll start. I'll start with just talking about Dune Part 2 as a film and as a follow-up to Part 1. I thought that it was a really great film. It was really well done. It was the payoff film.
Let us know the time and day that Dee actually said that a film was great.
It happens here and there periodically, but
didn't
know the time and day because it's rare. It's like
we won't hear this again for several years in all likelihood.
Not likely, but anyhow, maybe up on the next Full Eclipse. By that time, I'll have a great review for something. But this was great, and it did have a lot of high points that I feel like paid off a lot of the promise from the first part. If the first part was completely setting up, lots of exposition, lots of world building, obviously the big conflict or the big thing that happens is House Atreides is virtually wiped out overnight by House Harkonnen at the secret behest of the Padisha Emperor of the known universe, Shaddam IV, who in this film is portrayed by Christopher Walken. The story there, I saw before I went and saw the film. I saw a lot online about the story. People making a big deal about Denis Villeneuve saying that he doesn't focus on dialogue.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. I was reading up about that. And I think the way he said it was, he wasn't like, again, I kind of like what he was saying. He was basically like, people remember the visuals over the dialogue and the story. And then you had pushback on other people like, what are you talking about? I remember the story for everything and blah, 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 blah. And it's like,
people really kind of laid into that, and I don't think they really fully understood what he was saying. He's not saying he doesn't do dialogue. That's obviously impossible for films that he's done in the past. Like, people are too literal, man, and I'm a very literal person. So if I'm talking shit, then
and I think that's my point. I think the way that people misinterpreted what he was saying, he's saying that the medium itself is a audio visual form first and foremost. So those things come together with dialogue being sort of secondary almost in nature to that form and sense of sight and sound. And you can see that that's what he built upon, but that's not what he relies upon in terms of the storytelling. Now, I didn't have a problem following the story, but Dune itself, as the source material, is a large mythology, a lot of story and narrative and time spread out. that takes place over the course of several years. And having read the book, I feel like the only issue I had with part 2 was it felt like some of the narrative beats were glossed over a bit.
Now with that, do you think if it was like a true trilogy, you think it would have helped with that?
I don't know, because I think you can get part 2 of the book done with just one film, but this was a 2 hour and 40 something odd film. And I think
249. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of context that isn't in it that might have benefited from, made the film benefit from maybe another 20 or 40 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Just because, but again, I don't know if anyone who hasn't read the book would notice this. And I think that plays into the favor of this particular adaptation, because a lot is cut from the first part, but that's understandable. And also you can get away with that because some of those details in the first part don't matter as much later in the story, or they aren't big enough to even include to begin with. But then when you get to the back end, for example, I didn't feel like this was the one adaptation where I didn't feel like Paul and Shani's relationship actually felt as special and romantic as it has in previous adaptations.
Mm.
Not that it didn't land, it's just that it didn't feel,
it wasn't impactful, like it didn't land
as
hard,
impactful or as well developed. I'll put it like that. And I think that comes from the fact that they cut out a lot of the time that those two spend together before the finale of the story. And I think, again, if you haven't read the books, that probably doesn't matter as much. But having read the books, I feel like there was a little bit of a short change there. But that's about my only big issue with the film. Other than that, great action, lots of amazing, wide, epic shots, such as the final sequence with the sandworms attacking. That was something that I've been waiting to see in this version since, I saw part 1, the whole Muad'Dib leading the army. And in this one, I think it looked even more impactful. Although I think I would have liked the battle to have waged a little bit longer. It still hit all of the grand pieces of how that story is resolved itself. So the cast was still great. Would have liked more Pugh as Irulan and Walken as Shaddam. I feel like they weren't in the film all that much, and also feel like Austin Butler, who did a really good job as Fade Rotha, but I just feel like he wasn't in the film enough. He doesn't show up until I think halfway into the second act, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow.
And and I think that's what I mean by some aspects of the narrative that they cut out the film would have benefited more from it, because Fade Rotha is basically a foil to Paul Atreides. And I feel like it's one thing to depict him as, because the thing about Fade in the book is that outward appearance, otherwise you wouldn't assume that he was psychotic. I mean, his person, until you encountered his personality, his outward appearance wasn't that of, he didn't look psychotic. And so
he just did psychotic things, which is,
yes.
I, just to chime in real quick, the other interpretations that you get of Fade is both. He looks crazy, he acts crazy, and he does crazy things. Sting as Fade was great and probably unmatched as bananas as the David Lynch movie was. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much where I was going with it, is that in those films you got more scenes from Fade, because remember, Fade is but Fade is a point of view character in the books. So you don't just get the stories about him, you get narrative action from his point of view. And I think that helped with the overall theme of the Gom Jabbar and how they try to look, the Bene Gesserit are looking for that balance between a noble birth and a decent human being. And a lot of times you don't get both. You only get one or the other. And so again, that parallel between Fade and Paul was really strong in those in previous adaptations and in the book, but it comes off as a little two-dimensional here. It worked, but it does come off as a bit two-dimensional.
Now, Josh, like with you saw it, what 70 millimeter within the good sound?
No, not yet. That's Saturday.
I was about to ask. I was wondering if you went to the good stuff, or did you just watch it and then watch?
Oh, the good stuff was so there's a whole thing that happened. I was supposed to go, then I couldn't go. Then the thing that I was doing instead got canceled, so I really could have gone. But to hedge my bets and for the pod, I just went to the garbage theater around the way and made sure that I saw it before we recorded. But yeah, I'm going Saturday. But it pretty much shattered the infrastructure of the garbage theater around my way. Like the audio alone, like when the worms pop out of the sand. Oh man, woo! When the Harkonnen ships are basically obliterating the mountainside where the Fremen are hiding, you feel it in your chest. There's a lot of moments where the technical guys get to shine a little bit. Not to mention Hans Zimmer doing everything that he basically did in the first one. Like all the same themes return. It's the same style. All of it carries from the first film to this one. But to piggyback on some of the things that Dee mentioned, as far as the movie itself is concerned, it was phenomenal. It was great. It achieved. This is something that Dee said when we were talking about it yesterday. It achieved something that very few people were capable of achieving, and that is basically wrangling all the different elements and all the craziness that happens in the second half of the first book. It's a lot. It's stuff that people have said, yeah, I want to do Dune. And then when they sit down to actually sort of run through the logistics and the writing and the narrative of trying to hold it all together, they back off. They're like, you know what? Like, there's tons of people who were like, yeah, I said I wanted to do it until I actually had to do it. But, Denis Villeneuve, he he really nailed the crap out of this thing. I don't think anybody's going to come along and do a better job, especially visually, of a better job of bringing that film to. I wouldn't want to do it, but bringing that film to life, he visually especially brought it to life. He definitely put his spin on it, but it's still very much. Most of the things are very much the way they're described as I remember it when I read it 1,000 years ago, how things are described in the books.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, go ahead. God, my bad.
No, go ahead, bro. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say and add to that, I think there were things that, and a lot of chatter about this has been going on in some publications. There is some things that he changed about Shani that work better from, or not just Shani, but even Paul, that work better from the versus the book and the other adaptations, and that is when Paul switches and he drinks the poison water and the Kwisatz Haderach awakens in him. This time you see the anti-hero, the danger and the prophet more than you did in the previous iterations. And one of the reasons that Herbert is on record saying the reason why he wrote Dune Messiah is because so many people misinterpreted his intent for Paul, for how people should receive Paul at the end of the first Dune, which was, he was kind of seen as heroic. He liberates the Fremen and, avenges his family and all that stuff. But the danger that Paul feared is that the path, going down that path, which is the only way he could be successful, would incite the holy war, the jihad that would, kill billions, and it will be all in his name and in a fanatic way. I think you felt that even when, as they described the dangers of the Southern Fremen and how they're fanatics and they're full on believe in the Lasana Gaib and are willing to do whatever he commands. And when you see that power, that now Paul wields that power, and it's not heroic at all as much as it is dangerous. Yeah, he has his reasons, and as the protagonist, you get behind those reasons, but you still know, and it's again felt in this case, that a lot of people are about to die at his hands.
Yeah, and I think that pivots perfectly to one of the points that I was going to make. That is, Denis Villeneuve and the writers did a really good job of turning up the volume on certain things. Unfortunately, I don't think they did as good a job in some of the rearrangements. But I mean, by no means is that to say that it ruins the film or diminishes the film in majorly significant ways. But, and
it doesn't take away from the source material either.
Not at all.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, that's the echoing part of it, right? So you have the people that are kind of like you guys read the books, you've consumed, the old school version plus the sci-fi, which is hilarious because I love when people reference that. And then if I can kind of tell which side of the sci-fi spectrum they're on and how they react to it. It's kind of like,
what do you mean?
Well, because when people watch it, some people watched it way later than when it first came out. So then, with the first thing you comment on, what the CG, and you comment on it's kind of so like. Oh
yeah, the production design is horrendous. I was working promos for Sci-Fi back then, and yeah, I was one of those people. I don't think I watched it. That was one of the few things that we worked on that I did not watch when it aired, or even, I got advanced copies because I was working promos. I didn't watch it. I was like, this looks terrible. I'm going to keep it moving. And it wasn't until I think after it was done and the producer that was working on was like, I loved it. This, that, and the other. I was like, you what? He was like, you didn't watch it? I was like, no. And that was somebody I really respect as far as his opinion on television is concerned. So I was like, all right, well, I'll dive into it. And man, I am so happy he put me on because it like Dee was saying, it really does after these two films that just came out, it does the next best job of all the different adaptations and mediums that have come since people have been trying to adapt it. It does the very next best job. And that, by no means am I saying that to say, like it's not good. It's really good. It's really, really detailed. If you can just ignore the fact that it looks like something from the 80s that wasn't filmed on film, if you can ignore those two things, and I mean, barely looks like it's from the 80s. I'm exaggerating, probably like early 90s, but the production design isn't that heavy. It's not there like you would expect for other Sci-Fi Channel stuff. Because I mean, this came out around the same time that, or after, I want to say, after Battlestar, and we know the production value on that was great. So it was a little surprising.
Also a really big, ambitious undertaking, because this wasn't just adapting the first Dune novel, which is again broken into two parts in and of itself.
Yeah, it's like four of them.
This is Dune parts 1 and part 2, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. So that's 4 massive Herbert tomes that this sci-fi miniseries adapted.
Interesting.
And shout out to James McAvoy, who played Leto II, and that was literally, as far as I know, that was his first big thing, and he got on from there. But he killed it.
Wow!
Killed it.
Leto II is Paul Atreides and Shani's son.
Right, one of two kids that they have.
One of two children that they had, and spoiler alert, that's not something that Denis Villeneuve adapted, so that in Shani doesn't get pregnant and doesn't have a child yet. I mean, he's adapting Dune Messiah, so I think it's unavoidable.
Yeah,
but
he's gonna have to circle back for where they left off with Shani's character. They're going to have to circle back. So, Cam, you didn't see it, so we'll tell you what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So basically, at the end of the movie, you've seen the other ones. So, at the end of the movie, Paul basically demands to take the throne. And to maintain the line of legitimacy, he takes Shaddam's daughter as his bride. He doesn't have children with her. He has children with Shani. Denis Villeneuve did something a little different, where he sort of, and I thought it was the more I sit with it, the more I appreciate the turn that this takes for her character. I have questions about where this leaves her for when Dune Messiah rolls around. But so Shani basically is vehemently opposed to Paul becoming the religious figure / leader of everything under the sun as the film progresses. And he's opposed to it too, until he drinks the water of life and basically has his mind expanded and realizes, oh no, I have to do this. And
he's still opposed to it. He's
still opposed to it, but he embraces it. That's what I should say.
He knows it's unavoidable at that point.
Yeah,
so he doesn't wring his hands over it as much anymore as he did before that.
Yeah. And so after drinking the water of life, he basically sees all the different pathways, all the different possibilities, and realizes the only way that that things can go the way they're supposed to is if he embraces what he's been trying to avoid all this time. Shani and he have both been opposed to it. Now that he's not opposed to it anymore, post drinking the water of life and getting his nose open, she becomes very resentful. And at the end of the movie, so, you fast forward through all that stuff, all the stuff that I just rattled off. And basically, once he announces that he's taken, that he's taken Princess Erlan as his bride, even after telling Shani that, no matter what, I'll always love you, no matter what, she takes off. And so they're going to have to swing that back around because, like Dee was saying, by this point in the movie, not in the story, rather, she not only is she pregnant, but she's pretty much off the scene. Like she's, as I remember it, she's not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, D, but if I remember correctly, she's off the scene at this point. She's pregnant and carrying the twins and not really in the action anymore.
Wow.
Well, I believe in the film adaptations, she in the David Lynch version, she's present during the fight.
Right, she's present, but she's there in the throne room when the fight happens. Yes.
No. Well, she's actually also, I'm pretty sure Sean Young's character rides a worm.
Nice.
In that, but I could be wrong. But in the books, I don't think she's present until the throne room, until he has all of them in the room, and right before.
Right, she's not fighting.
He fights. She's there when he kills Feyd-Rautha.
Right.
She's there when he does that. But she's not that. She wasn't there before that, I don't think. But the difference is they split. They make Shani opposed to the Lisan al-Gaib in general, the whole prophecy. And that's a change, because in the books and in all the other adaptations, she's just as devout as Stilgar and the others. In fact, her love for him only makes it even more devout. I mean, she actually, and they cut this, but she actually kills another Fremen who was talking stuff about like potentially challenging him.
Yeah.
And when Paul was asleep and he wakes up and here's Shani knifing another Fremen because he talked about killing Paul and taking his place.
And so
that's my man.
Just as a point of reference, Cam Lisan al-Gaib literally for the movie translates to the voice of the outer world. Or Outworlder.
Yeah, well, it's the same. That's it in the book as well, if I'm not mistaken. That's the trend. That's all Herbert. But anyway, that's to say that they did make that change, and it's not a bad change, because it does compound. It does. That's part of the showing of what we were saying earlier of how he made that choice to show that Paul isn't in a place of he's the hero. He's in a place of, out of necessity, this is what he had to become. And now he's on this dark path.
Right. Reluctant acceptance.
A reluctant, almost like someone called it the anti-hero's journey. And I thought that was apt, because Paul really does take an anti-hero or an anti-villain's journey because of what he becomes. And in Dune Messiah, that becomes more pronounced, because you get point of views from people who are not in his circle, who didn't benefit from his benevolence and all of that. And you see why that figure of the prophet, of the Messiah, is damning. And so it's a very interesting. So I think that break with Shani was meant to highlight that. But to Josh's point, it then begs the question because I think his challenge for Dune Messiah is going to be, can he scale down the over-reliance on the visual form and sense, and now invest in largely, because Dune Messiah is mostly political intrigue. And
that's right. And so we're not gonna get a 3-hour epic again.
No,
probably not. More tight 90-second thriller kind of situation, which will be interesting to see how the
2 hours probably.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see how the audience reacts to that, because it is. Yeah, it's like I said, this is a really interesting movie in terms of reactions, because you have like the hardcore sci-fi folks that are really eating it up. you have the casual fans that are like, yo, this is really dope. Like I've never seen this before in my life. And then you have like another fans that was like, the first one was boring, so I'm good.
And it hits on all of those.
The theory around my way was empty, and I'm 100% certain there's nothing. It has nothing to do with anything other than people who didn't really get how much this was this was the first movie was set up for the second, and so they just begged off, which is bananas.
Yeah. And I think that group is a lot smaller than it seems, because where I am in the Midwest, I'm at the theater on a Saturday morning at 11 a.m., hoping to get what Josh got, which is almost a completely empty, devoid of human being other than the ushers or the ticket collector in the theater, and my nephew, of course.
That's so unlike you. You're such a people person.
I know. And it happens that it was packed filled to the teeth at 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So the film, I think, to that point that you both just made, the film has successfully done what the other adaptations couldn't. And that is breach the wall of the general audience, the science fiction, the general movie science fiction lover, the moviegoer in general, the blockbuster lover. That's what Lynch's Dune could not do or did not do. That the sci-fi adaptation couldn't even aim for that because of it was on TV. And so this one, again, the first one had big numbers, box office, and could have did bigger if it hadn't had the dual release of the, short-lived COVID strategy. But this one is making a lot, is continuing that. And it's very interesting because it's one of those things that for years was said to be almost impossible to adapt into film form and make it successful.
Yeah. People have talked. I couldn't give you a number, but I know there are several directors that I read being attached to this thing over the course of the ensuing years between David Lynch and Denis Villeneuve. And of those guys, a bunch of them all had all this enthusiasm. I'm going to cast Mel Gibson and all this other, in the 80s, not 80s, the 90s, there was all sorts of stuff. There were all kinds of actors attached to all type of different versions of this thing. And then at some point, the director or the writers realize, this is going to be difficult to put to film. I don't know if we can do this. And for whatever one reason or another, whether it's the writers, because then there was one version that almost happened and there were a bunch of different writers attached because all the writers kept going, nah. And then there were a bunch of different directors attached because they would get to a certain point in the narrative and then they would go, nah. So, that Denis Villeneuve was able to pull this off and then pull it off as well and as accurately and being able to sort of piece together the elements that he did to create the world of Arrakis and the larger world of just Dune in general. It's an impressive feat. It has its minor flaws. I would say one of them probably, and this is something that Dee and I talked about, was sort of the passage of time and how you don't really get a sense of just how much stuff actually happens. And I personally feel like Jessica is pregnant the same way, as we got revealed for us in the first movie. But by the time you get toward the end by the time you get to the throne room duel between Fade and Paul, Alia's already been born. I say Alia has already been born. And so if I'm remembering correctly, she's there and she's not grown, but she's like a little kid, but she's got the glowing eyes because her mother drank the water of life. And so of course it got infused into her. And she's a whole other story for another day. But
I can break that down really quick because a lot of people, I had to explain that whole Jessica talking to the child in her womb and what happened there. Well, basically when she becomes the Reverend Mother of the Fremen, that ritual that they do with her drinking the poison water opens up her mind and she inherits all of the memories and the experiences and everything from the past,
from Queen Mothers before
right. Reverend Mothers before her, like all of them. So that's covering thousands of years. And what happens is they didn't know that she was pregnant when they do the ritual. And what it does is it also opens up the child's the fetus's mind in that same way. So she becomes aware while in the womb.
Mm-hmm.
So basically imagine like she's literally aware, like no, as far as we know, no born human is sentient in a way of knowing before they are born into the world. So this was kind of one of those weird things in the story that he kept, but he didn't keep all of the details. Because like Josh said, by the time they reached the battle, she had well been born, and she freaked out all of the Fremen. They were afraid of her because, again, she looked like a child, but she spoke like a full-grown, knowledgeable adult.
Mm-hmm.
Because in fact she was hundreds of thousands of them.
And she, if I remember correctly, she announces, I don't remember if this is something I got from the book or from the movie, is all or David Lynch's movie, is all starting to melt together now. But she's the one who announces like, oh, you can sleep if you want to, but the Kwisatz Haderach is on his way. Don't worry. He'll be here in a minute.
She announces, she says my brother, she says it in a creepy way. She's like, my brother is my brother, the Kwisatz Haderach is on his way, right before Paul pulls up. and it's for the actress that played her in the David Lynch film actually grew up to be Alicia Witt. She was
get out of here.
Yeah, she was the child version. That was her first film, and she was like she was the child version of Alia in the David Lynch.
Definitely was creepy in that.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's there's definitely a lot of story that was left on the table. It's again begs the question of, what, but I think it's a good interest of like, okay, how I'm curious and excited to see how he'll approach Dune Messiah. Because I think what he did was he found a lane and he stuck to it and didn't try to do more than that with Dune Part 1 and Part 2, because what he gets is the broad strokes, all of Herbert's themes, his narrative motifs about religion, politics, and technology, and what they do to a society and to humanity as a species. And I think as long as the fact that he's able to capture that and create a visual experience with the world while not losing anything too big or that takes you too far away from the story. Like I said, the shiny change. At first, when I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is different. This is really different because I'm so used to seeing the devoted Shani at that point, who is like Muad'Dib. She's like ride or die. Like she
heavy ride or die. You ain't never going to see another woman in a movie more ride or die than Shani.
Right. She literally murders people for him, like not without a second thought. And was happy to have his kids and follow him no matter what. And again, we're talking about something that was written at a time that wasn't thinking about the gender the gender dynamic. And so I think, again, this change helps put Paul and where he is in the context, because now you have Shani, who's probably the only one in the group, the core group, who is not feeling that, who doesn't believe in this prophet or see the Messiah as being dangerous.
Right.
Jessica, and hats off to Rebecca Ferguson, because this is the first time I actually thought that Jessica was portrayed as I read her in the book, which is a very manipulative individual who doesn't care about Paul's feelings or Shani's feelings or anything. She only cares about fulfilling a certain destiny that she helped write.
Right, on behalf of the Bene Gesserit, yeah.
Well, at that point, I'll give her credit that she was more so doing it on behalf of survival for her family.
So now,
it ends up being both. True.
Yeah. So now with the slight changes that Dennis did, do you think it actually helped to get more towards the overall narrative as opposed to just like hindering it? Like, one thing that, say for the Sting version of Dune, it was kind of all over the place. It was still cool because, if you didn't know what Dune was, you just saw it, you're like, this is weird. But then if you read it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Where
he was also doing too much.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was 80s acting, so doing too much in context, I guess, because it worked for all the over the topness of that film, but it was still too much for the character because Fade is a little bit more subdued. What you got with the version of Fade, he wasn't. He was a little.
I wasn't specifically talking about Fade. I was talking about David Lynch and
my bad.
And the adaptation. That's what I thought Cam was talking about, but I could have been wrong. I was speaking that just in the fact that David Lynch tried to do too much in a structural way. The characters when you heard their inner monologues and they were whispering really low the thoughts in their heads. It was too much.
Yeah, spice. The spice. I think that's the most interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think, if with something like this, when it gets to an epic, we get to an epic, a sci-fi, opus, and then it actually gets the proper due, like in terms of like the production value, the actual proper budget, and at this point we're at 2024, we could kind of literally make anything now.
Pretty much.
But it's also more like, do you make it and still, make a profit because we still live in capitalism? But so now with you guys seen it, how does it place within the lexicon of our top sci-fi things?
Oh, for me, it's way up there. This is one of the best science fiction movies I've ever seen. Seen real time, not like, if we're talking like movies that, that came before I was able to go to the movies by myself as an adult and all of that. I think it still holds up, but for personal viewing, this is one of the best movies I've ever seen. The best pair of movies, I should say, that I've ever seen. It pretty much checks off all the boxes, man. And then a bunch of boxes that don't normally get checked for science fiction. Like it's got scale, it's got that epic, the epic, that Lawrence of Arabia epic kind of scale that's happening. It's freaking brilliant, man. Like I can't say enough about how good the pair of movies, like the entire story is. D, what do you got?
No, I agree. I think that in terms of science fiction lexicon for movies, I think it's up there. Even I had compared it to Empire Strikes Back to Josh on in our chat, and then I see that apparently Christopher Nolan made the same comparison recently.
Really?
That it was that to him, it resonates in the same way as a follow-up that the Empire, as Empire Strikes Back. And I think by that, he is probably denoting to the payoff and the elevation of this, the elevated stakes and the payoffs. And I think you get that in this film, because you see the transformation of this character into a figure that is, again, epic, and that has taken that hero's journey from the very beginning when we see him in the first film to the very end of this film, where it's the Chekhov's gun of Leto Atreides, telling Paul that you have to harness the desert power. And by the end of that film, we see Paul riding a grandfather worm with two others flanking him, with an army of tens of thousands of Fremen popping up out of the sand and laying waste to the Sardaukar, who are the like top soldiers in the entire empire. So yeah, it makes good on a lot of the setup from the first film, and it doesn't do it in a way and it does it in a totally cinematic way.
I loved that they hit home that Jessica is what's his face's daughter?
Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah, thank you, Baron Harkonnen. That she's his daughter, and that means that not only does Paul take the throne by force, but he's also taking it by right of the bloodline. And he shores that up by wedding Princess Irulan, which I don't think anybody really peeped that that's really him marrying his cousin. But
well, they're all familiarly connected either way it went, because even the Atreides is implied to have some familial connection to they never say their name in the movie, but Shaddam's Irulan's house name is Carano.
Carano. Sorry,
Carano.
And plus, you can't have royalty without incest, so that's just
that's a whole other conversation. But
especially not that kind of the lines grad and all that stuff.
But yeah, they do an excellent job, man. They do a really excellent job. I would say this is like top 5 all time. I wouldn't say top 3, but top 5 for sure. And yeah, I can't say enough about it, man. I mean, because of the little minor things, like I gave the first one a 10, I wouldn't give this one a 10, but I would damn sure give it like a 9.75.
Yeah, I can concur with that. I think I may have given the first one either a 9.5 or 10. And this one, I think after the first viewing, I definitely give a 9, because it elevates everything. And, the one thing I said that I would have liked more of is just more character development, specifically for Fade, the Emperor, and Irulan. It was interesting because, you see an actor like Pugh in that role, and you like, man, she's barely in it, and you want to see her a lot more of her. And then obviously Christopher Walken is like, when you know that he's cast as Shaddam, you're expecting at least one legendary scene with him, delivering some kind of great dialogue or monologue or something like that.
Now, let me talk to you about what you said when you said that you wanted to. How did you put it? You said you wanted to take over. I don't know if that's a thing that I'm gonna let you do. Like, I could totally see him like murdering some dialogue as Paul pulls up on some right. So I'm king now.
And he has a couple of lines, but I don't know if he was told what it didn't seem like he brought anything to the role that was like, okay, I'm Christopher Walken and I'm adding this to this character and it doesn't seem like he got the direction to be anything but just like
an old emperor,
an old subdued emperor. And he has a couple of lines, and I think all told maybe 3 scenes.
3, exactly.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
One in the beginning,
all
one
told,
in the middle, and then at the end.
Yeah, and all told, Ireland may have 2 more than that.
Yep, 4 or 5.
And Fade may have had a couple more than Ireland.
Yep.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, to be fair, Fade is not in every version of this of the story that I've seen. Fade gets impactful story time, like screen time rather, but he's not like on screen on a heavy basis. So this kind of follows, but I agree with D. I think you needed to develop him a little bit more. They definitely touched on the sort of child abusey, homoerotic relationship between Baron Harkonnen and Fade, a little more than I've ever seen, that's for sure.
Well, they also showed Fade as being somewhat, which is true to the book, being somewhat suspicious and reluctant to be around Baron Harkonnen. Like, he's crazy, but Fade's crazy in his own way, but he also is very, from his point of view, Baron Harkonnen makes him uncomfortable. So he's always like got his hand on his blade when he's around him, because he's not really a person, like he is that creepy uncle.
Word. And I love that he legit was like, yo, I will kill you. Like, Fade, you don't really see that that side of Fade where he's like, I will kill anybody, including my own uncle, who is like the guy.
Yeah. And but I think the problem that wouldn't have been a problem, I think, if those characters had 1 or 2 scenes in part 1 as well, because again, Fade is an antagonist, but you get more of a sense of who he is and that parallel he shares with Paul than you do in this. In this, you just get the villainous counterpart who does unspeakably evil things with no rhyme or reason.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other part I was going to say overall, though, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this lands. Because, I mean, the first Dune made a little under 500, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 500 mil. And I'm curious to see how this one does with all the buzz and all that kind of stuff. I
mean, it's already cleared 178 million.
Yeah, so it made its advertising budget back.
It cost $190 million on a $190 million budget, and made back $178.5 million, which I think projection wise it'll still grow from there. So it'll definitely make more than what it spent.
Yeah.
The fact that I can't get a 70 millimeter seat for a week is telling. I think that and IMAX theaters are hedging the same bet that they hedged with Oppenheimer, that if we keep it in theaters, if we keep it in premium theaters, specifically IMAX 70 millimeter for an extended period of time, then people will continue to come see it for as long as we leave it in there. So it's going to be in, my impression is that it's going to be in IMAX 70 milli for the foreseeable future. Until something else comes out that requires that it gets bumped. And even then, because I forget what came out after Oppenheimer, and it got bumped. Not Mission Impossible, something else got bumped. And you can see it in they had to split time between Mission Impossible, Oppenheimer, and whatever that movie was. I don't remember, but like you're talking 3 different movies that have to go into the Dolby, now get jammed into only Dolby Cinema as a premium, as a premium option.
Interesting.
So yeah, they're going to do the same thing. I'm willing to bet.
All right, that'd be dope. All right, so final words. Do you guys think this is raised the bar in terms of like sci-fi outings on movies? I mean, we all can't be Rebel Moon, but Dune does definitely raises the bar a bit.
Wow.
I
heard a quote that said Rebel Moon was the new Star Wars, but I'm gonna say that for another pod.
Why do you antagonize us? That's what I want to know.
Must be the foil. But so I mean, at this level, like you said, both of you guys said, in terms of actually hitting all the points of being a good film, being a good sci-fi film, being well casted, and then actually, going to that pacing. Because, we've all sat through 3-hour movies too. And we either have that, the same, you basically have one of two things. Oh, it's over, or damn, it took forever.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think, I think 3-hour movies are probably going to slowly start to be not as prevalent. Maybe we'll get like once a year, but I think this one and, Oppenheimer was I guess 3 hours as well. I'm not mistaken.
Well, this one was just under 3 hours. So it wasn't, so it was like 240 something, maybe a little 230 something, but it wasn't 249. Well, okay. So that's basically 3 hours almost, give or take 10 minutes.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you guys think that sci-fi, the bar has been risen? And I'm not sure what else could be adapted that would have this type of level of scope that's out there, that's left. I mean, there's always tons of things out there, but like at something from the old school, I would say that would have the same level of depth.
You can take it first.
Well, I would say that there are many novels in the old school, in the Herbert class of science fiction that can be adapted and rise to that level of epicness. I mean, Asimov has quite a few even himself, and that's even outside of Foundation. But I think that in terms of adapting a novel as difficult as Dune, that this does set a high bar that will be tough to rise above or even come close to, just because of the carefulness of how it was made and all of the creative consideration that went into seemingly the choices of what to include from the source material versus what to stray away from it and to stick to it and stay the course. It was a gambit, but it was one that paid off. So I don't know if there's anything on the horizon that can rise to this level, especially again, the epicness, the set choices of shooting in an actual desert and getting that authenticity, that look and feel is not just some built or CGI design set. And so given all the shortcuts and all the stuff that's taken, I think this is definitely raised a high bar that will, I don't know what could, other than probably the adaptation of a true adaptation of Starship Troopers or a Highland story could get rise to that occasion, to that bar.
I'm there for a Starship Trooper remake with all of
like all the basic technology. I mean like the like a legit like the like Filipino Johnny Rico,
yep. The grittiness too and all that,
the mech suits, the dropping into the, because like one of the things about that game, not too straight to our hell divers, is that is like what the novel of Starship Trooper was. Like they were dropped in the middle of the zone, not on like a ship where they could comfortably walk out, but just like a straight drop ship into the ground, and then they popped out into the action. So yeah, I think a Highland book adaptation could hit the same notes. Maybe Niven's Ring World could have that same epicness, but Herbert's Dune is like Star Wars in that it's science fantasy. Dune is much more hard science in terms of how defined and how much verisimilitude goes into the science of the world, because not a lot of it is explained except for the fact that, you know, it doesn't involve artificial intelligence or thinking machines and all that stuff because of the history of that world. So it's unique in that way. And that's another reason why it raises the bar.
Yeah, that's crazy. Josh?
I've been sitting here trying to chew on that question for a while. And, you know, I mean, will anything touch or surpass in terms of scale? I mean, possibly, you know, I mean, there's original stories waiting out there to be told. There's some kid who saw Dune today, and, you know, we might be in our 60s or 70s, and that kid turns into an adult and is in the film industry and decides, I want to make this movie, and, you know, blows the doors off of Dune. You know, but Dune is a once in a generational type film. I don't think we're going to see another movie hit these heights in terms of storytelling, in terms of just raw adaptation, like just a really good interpretation of literary material. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it'll happen because it always happens, and it's going to continue to happen. But anytime soon, no. I don't think that's something that, this is not one of those movies. This is not one of these visions that comes along just every day. You know, yeah, it's inspired. It's, you know, Denis Villeneuve has been wanting to make this movie since before he got into film school, since before he started making films. So, you know, the fact that he was you don't make a movie like this and not have passion for the source material. You don't just decide, you know, you're not just making a business decision to say, I'm going to make Dune and then make what this man.
No, he clearly has read and loved the books, and you could, and that's the reason why I'm like, I can't hold the things that he cut out against him or that he changed, because it shows that he understands the fundamentals of Herbert's storytelling. And he also inevitably, when you're talking about a 2 hour, 120 minute to 160 minute feature film, you're talking about what, 300 pages of literary prose plus 300 plus pages to a story. You know, something is going to get left on the table, and so it's totally understandable. And with all the subplots that are involved in Dune and the threads, some of those threads had to be cut early on and just never returned to it.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I mean, again, it's one of those things where it's like pretty much did the impossible of adapting something that was almost unadaptable. Mm-hmm. And it's actually pretty awesome in the time that we live in, especially with Hollywood and their over and over again remakes and stuff, that he actually got the budget and then the leeway to actually see it through.
Yeah, I mean, 9.75 for Dune 2. I'd say for the pair, 9.99. Yeah, if I remember correctly, I gave the first one a 10.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, like he's taking on a massive challenge. That's why I said I'm excited and nervous for him at the same time for Dune Messiah, because Josh has read the book, I've read the book, and I just gotta say, I can't imagine it's gonna be easy, because it's not. It is a totally different book than the first Dune. Like it's same style and same world, but years have passed. Paul is now emperor. He's a different figure. All in general, like he's married
he's gone full asshole. Like he's not.
Yeah, and he knows it, and he's doing some things he's doing it intentionally on purpose, and it's all a part of his plan, and there are plans within plans within plans, and like there are all these different, every faction that he pissed off in the first film is plotting against him, including his own lady wife. So, it's completely, it's Game of Thrones before that story was popular in terms of like, again, the court intrigue, there's not many battles. Yeah, there are some things in the background regarding the Holy War, with the Fremen, but largely it's about all of these plots against Paul and their challenges to his power and control over spice. And like I said, that's more storytelling than it is visual scale and scope. Right. Like that's quiet scenes, and that's why I said I can't see how they get from where he left things off to, because the big thing about Paul marrying Irulan is that he makes it clear that he's marrying her, but he will never give her his seed ever. Like that he would never sleep with her. He will never touch her so that the line of her family could never be continued through him. He even tells her like she could go out and have as much sex with whoever she wants to. He doesn't care. He's like, as long as you do not get pregnant, and just know that I will not be getting you pregnant, because my children who rule after me will be the children with me and Shani.
He also is very hot and cold with her. Like there's tender moments that he has with her, followed immediately by like the full. The faucet's hot, and then the faucet's like scalding hot, and then it's dead cold. Like it's harsh.
Very Joffrey Sansa, except less physical abuse, and more just mental. Like he still sees the daughter of the man responsible for putting him in that position, and he resents it. So there's still a lot of that. But again, all of this stuff is like nothing but storytelling. And so that's why I'm curious how we go from this iteration, Dune Part 1 and 2, which is heavy on the visual scale and scope and mythology, and it is epic because it's an epic space opera story, to this more quiet political drama, court intrigue drama, where Paul is now the figure that everyone around him is trying to bring down.
And what's ill is he kind of has to let it happen, because this is the way, this was the way that he foresaw for things to go. And he knows where it's going. He knows how it's going to end. and he knows that he has to let it happen.
Yep. Mm-hmm. That's even heavier. All right. Well, we'll make sure we don't go to the full 3 hours of Dune, but a good solid hour here was good for the nerds out here. I think, especially folks that really read the books and have consumed the other Dune stuff. I think overall this discussion was like something that was dope. You could get into those little nuances.
Yeah, and I encourage people who love science fiction, who love that old school literature, hard science fiction, where it's a little bit, it's kind of a challenge to read, but it's also really rewarding when you read it and kind of let yourself fall into that world. It's a really detailed, well thought out mythology, and the further you go into it, the more you understand the things, the lessons, the sort of narrative heart that Frank Herbert wants people to take away. It's very interesting, and it does make you reflect about certain aspects of our own time and our own society. And I know that sounds strange when you see what the story is, but you can only kind of get that from really thrusting yourself into at least the first 4 books, Dune, Messiah, Children of Dune, and then God, Emperor Dune. Because God, Emperor Dune is really the end of the Paul Atreides and his kids arc. Yeah, and there's, of course, a couple more after that. Oh, I read it. Now, that's the one that will never be I do not see how they will ever adapt that.
Yeah, I read the synopsis. Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's set like 3,000 years after Children of Dune. Leto is a full half man, half giant worm, and he is a god emperor and all this stuff. And much like Paul, even more so than Paul, he's actually considers himself to be like a predator of mankind that's going to teach humanity to evolve and survive. It's crazy.
It's already wild.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's already wild. But that's part of the reason why they're always in books and don't got to be adapted.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes it special.
Yep. So. Some things don't need to be adapted.
Because what's wild is I stopped off at the end of Children of Dune. If I'm remembering correctly, now I feel like I'm mixing the sci-fi series and what I read. Correct me if I'm wrong, D. At the end of the book, he allows himself to be infused with a worm or worms, and he's beginning to like develop worm scale on his skin.
Yeah. In Children of Dune, Leto sort of takes a similar journey as Paul in the first film, in which he gains prescient sight, and then he drinks the poison water, and he sees the path, which is called the Golden Path in the story.
Yes,
that Paul saw, but it's the path that Paul refused outright to take. It was even worse than the path he actually takes. Leto, however, decides that it's unavoidable. He has to take that path. And part of that path is becoming part worm. And yeah, it goes from there.
Oh, yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. Oh, Herbert goes... the philosophy, the biggest thing about Dune is the philosophy behind a lot of the story and the different concepts, existentialism, for example. Like, that's like the biggest thing, because what you end up seeing when you're reading Leto's chapters in God Emperor is you finally get to see what the prescient sight does to the mind more than so what the Kwisatz Haderach is and why it's like heavy is the head that wears the crown, because this is like literally a mind that can bridge all of humanity's existence in space and time.
Interesting. See, that's when it gets, yeah, you're right. That's when, and I think also this is a good point where, you talk about a lot where there's a difference between science fiction and science fantasy. Mm-hmm. And I think this is like true science fiction where there's a lot of heady philosophy and then that there's tons of fantasy, but it's deep, steeped in science where, like we always say, Star Wars is a great example where it's more fantasy, less science.
And there are definitely some very large biblical parallels in the first, I'd say for most of the first book. But it diverges from that very quickly by the time you get to the second one.
And then also you see that what Herbert does is he makes it clear that these characters are descendants of us, if you will.
10,000 years in the future?
20,000 years into the future and likely in an entirely different galaxy. And because this because when both Paul and Leto have their prescient moments where they can literally tap the mind of their former ancestors and learn their experiences about their world and their time. In the book, Leto and Paul interact with figures from our time, but they're not identified. You have to really have a sense of history to really understand what's happening in the moment. Like, oh man, he's actually referencing the first moon landing or whatever, what I'm saying, or World War I or whatever, or something like that. But he doesn't call it out by that designation or that nomenclature. It's something that is a reference to that. But as a reader, you have to kind of have a prior knowledge of it. And like I said, but that's the aspect of it that makes it hard science fiction.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, well, we're going to wrap this up because if not, we're going to be having a whole nother science lesson. But it means to say, go watch it, read the books. And plus stuff like this is like when Hollywood actually gets it right. And I think that's when you need to really like embrace it and be like, oh, wait, this is really dope. Go see it on the proper sound with the proper screen so you can really get the full experience. Because there's not too many films that are like this. And, I bring it all the time. I totally missed freaking Fury Road when it was out on 70 millimeter and it was on IMAX. And I will never do that again. So I will be making sure I see this in the correct formats.
Oh yeah. If Oppenheimer is any indicator of what a movie can be like when you film in 70 millimeter IMAX, I cannot wait to see what Dune 2 is going to look like on that screen. If you have an IMAX theater near you that is doing 70 millimeter, hell, if it's not near you, travel if you have to, but absolutely do any movie that comes out that looks even moderately interesting and go see it in IMAX 70 millimeter. You will be heartily rewarded.
Yeah.
Yep. With that recommendation, this is Blerdlines. Thanks for listening, and we are out.
Peace. Long live the fighters.